Chevreuse is finally coming back after having been locked up in Hoyo's dungeons for 9 months since her release, and I'm honestly pretty torn. She's one of those unique characters designed to unlock new niches by making different playstyles much stronger. In her case, she's the captain of Overloaded, and Overloaded can be way more fun than it's given credit for. I have so many characters who excel in these teams, and Chevy makes them really shine. But the first time around, I only got her C0. I'm loath to wish in the hopes of getting a 4-star, and she's fantastic already at C0, but I'm very tempted. Let's talk about why. Chevy is another one of those characters who appear out of nowhere, take center stage in some time-limited content, then disappear, and after that only show their face in minor roles in other characters' stories. She's a captain in Fontaine's Security and Surveillance Patrol, a mix of soldier and an investigative detective. She made her first appearance in the Roses and Muskets event in version 4.3, in which she was one of the main characters. If you missed the event, I highly recommend watching back some overviews, since it was a really good low-stakes story with a fantastic ending. Right from the moment I saw her though, I hated Chevy's appearance. She has a gigantic flap of purple hair which has that spiky anime look, and her guard uniform clashes with it horribly. I wish they'd either have given her reddish brown hair to match the outfit, or maybe changed up her clothing somehow. However, I really like her as a character. She has an interesting past, a nuanced take on justice and law enforcement, and her friendship with other characters were entertaining, especially hers with Cheery. She also shows up in Cheery's quest, which I loved, and Lynette's hangout, which I haven't even started, and outside of that, she's entirely absent from the story. Despite having my least favorite design by far, she won me over in the end. After all, she does bring snacks. However, by the time her banner came around in the latter half of the patch, I was undecided. I still hated her design, and while her personality made up for it, I would have been very happy if her kit had been underwhelming, since then I could happily not have her in my teams. Chevreuse actually wields 2 weapons, a spear and a musket. She uses her spear for her normal attacks, which have the typical polished animations, this time with very rigid martial forms, which really lean into her backstory and suit her nutcracker aesthetic, but are pretty irrelevant during gameplay. Meanwhile, she uses her musket for both her skill and burst. Her skill has both tap and hold version. If you tap, she'll shoot a nearby enemy, while her hold version allows you to aim. Either version will trigger some healing over time, though it's fairly weak unless you load up on HP and healing bonus. Her burst fires an explosive grenade at the enemies, which splits into smaller shells which explode in a second wave after a short delay. Her damage output isn't particularly impressive, and I've generally found her burst to be most useful just for applying pyro in order to trigger her passives. Her passives, then, are the truly important parts of her kit. Her 4th Ascension passive is pretty decent, but can take a little conscious effort to set up and use. When the team triggers an overloaded reaction, her next aimed skill shot is an extra large overcharged bullet. You can see the indicator next to her when she has one available. These bullets have a larger AoE and trigger an attack buff to Pyro and Electro characters in the party, which scales off Chevy's HP, up to 40% buff once she's past 40k HP. Her 1st Ascension passive is the real game changer though. When she's played in a team with only Pyro and Electro characters, any overloaded reactions will shred enemies' resistance to Pyro and Electro by 40%. In other words, when used in Overloaded, she does the job of Anemo VV user, and more conveniently too, since she shreds both at once without requiring the finicky double swirl setup, and since her passive works against all enemies. While that might sound a little complicated, in practice it's very easy to make the most of her. You trigger an overloaded reaction first, for example by applying Electro just before using Chevy's burst, and then use her hold skill to shoot an enemy. And that's it! At C0, she's a very good character who drastically improves a previously neglected style of team, but her Constellations, unfortunately for me, really make her shine. Her C1 adds a mild battering ability. She restores 6 energy to the active character on field when they cause an overloaded reaction, though this has a 10-second cooldown which makes it sound a little underwhelming. Her C2 adds a secondary explosion following her hold skill, applying further pyro, and therefore potentially more overloaded reactions, and dealing more damage. Her C3 raises her skill level for more damage and better healing. Her C4 grants her 2 extra uses of her hold skill after using her burst, further increasing her damage. Her C5 raises her burst level, again just an increase to her damage output. Finally, her C6 is the big one. It adds pyro and electro damage bonus to her skill, 20% per stack with up to 3 stacks at a time, meaning a 60% elemental damage bonus. It also adds some extra team-wide healing too, though that's definitely an afterthought. In summary, Chevreuse is fantastic in teams with just Electro and Pyro characters. She provides decent healing and a bit of damage, but her main purpose is to boost Pyro and Electro damage caused by her teammates. At C0, she's roughly equivalent to having a VV user in the team, though she's more convenient since Anemo character would need to double swirl in order to shred resistance to both elements. She also has an extra advantage there since she can shred resistance in situations where Anemo users cannot, such as when fighting enemies who have an innate aura. At C6, she also provides a damage buff which is even stronger than Kazuha's, plus some other minor benefits such as little energy generation. She's a fantastic character to have available. That's all well and good, but didn't overloaded teams have a bad reputation? The overloaded reaction has two main downsides, knockback and low scaling. An overloaded reaction is an explosion, and if there are enemies close to that explosion, it knocks them backwards. For a long time, the consensus was that this is annoying, since it sends smaller enemies flying around the place, leading you to constantly chase them down in order to keep attacking. However, in my experience, it's actually an advantage. Many of the characters you'd use as a DPS in these teams are either pretty mobile or have good range on their attacks, so smaller enemies being knocked back isn't often a problem for me. But more importantly, against larger enemies it's a huge advantage. They can be a pain to fight with other teams due to how tanky they are, while overloaded teams can keep them almost permanently stunned through constant knockback. I actually prefer overloaded teams against these enemies for this reason. And the lower scaling just means that you should focus your team on boosting your main DPS character's raw damage rather than gearing them towards reactions. And that's where Chevy truly shines. Before Chevy existed, overloaded was underrated but not truly great. Now that she's here, it's even better. So, despite her design, her personality won me over and her kit looked interesting enough that I decided to at least try to get her. Unfortunately for me, the 5-star she was available alongside were Raiden and Yoimiya. I love both of them, but already have C2 Raiden and have zero interest in making her any more powerful, while Yoimiya's Constellations really don't interest me either. As I touched on in my previous video, wishing for 4 stars is an absolute mess in Genshin, and I generally try to avoid it entirely. In Chevy's case, I had one advantage. I was at 0 pity on my 50-50. That's just about the only time I feel like there's little downside to wishing for a 4-star. If you get unlucky and the wish turns gold, either now you have a guarantee for whoever you want next, or you got an extra 5-star and only spent 10 to 20 wishes to get it. I dropped a couple of temples and managed to snipe myself one single copy of Chevy. As much as I would have loved her Constellations to try out that C6, going further just didn't feel worth it. I decided I would have to wait until she came back, because surely they'd put her on a better banner for me next time, right? Chevy isn't really worth building for damage, so instead I'd recommend building her as a buffer with a little bit of healing built in. If she has enough crit rate, arguably her most valuable weapon is the Favonius Lance, since it helps with the entire team's energy needs. If her crit rate is too low to reliably trigger it, then the main alternatives are the HP spears. Black Tassel is the most accessible and has the highest substat, though the event weapon Dialogue of the Desert Sages and the craftable Rightful Reward are also great options and offer some energy in return. My Chevy has a good enough crit rate to use Favonius, but without a HP spear I'd need to shuffle her artifacts to reach 40k, and since my teams tend to have really good ER, I decided to prioritize her attack buff over turning her into a battery. For most people, Favonius might be more useful. For artifact stats, she generally wants all HP, though an ER Sense can be useful if you want to keep her burst available on cooldown, and she can use a healing bonus circlet if needed, but again, personally I try to capitalize on her attack buff as much as possible. Since her A4 passive's attack buff maxes out at 40%, the goal here is for her to reach 40k HP if possible, and only then focus on other stats. If she has a Favonius Lance, then she'll also want a decent amount of crit rate in order to trigger its passive. Arguably, her best option when it comes to artifact sets is 4P's Noblesse, which provides even more of an attack buff to the team. The other sets which are often listed as worth considering for her include Song of Days Past, Ocean-Hued Clam, and so on, but generally she's not that great at triggering any of the passives, and it's generally not worth the effort in my opinion. You could also go 4P's Maidens for extra healing. Instead, if you don't farm for Noblesse for her, she'd be better left with mixed 2P sets. HP, ER, or healing bonus are all worthwhile, since that allows you to reach her build requirements without so much investment. Mine has dual healing sets, which is probably why she has such great crit stats. Since Chevy's buffs are provided entirely by her passives, you can completely ignore leveling her talents if you don't feel like spending the resin. I personally leveled her skill since it provides enough healing, and I'll level her burst to get some minor extra damage once I'm out of Mora Poverty. Her normals are definitely best left untouched. While it might seem like being locked to Electro and Pyro teammates would mean she'd have few possible teams, those two elements have a ton of fantastic options. Bennett is of course ever present due to his healing and attack buff. Sarah can be a fantastic buffer and sub DPS, and if you do need extra healing, there's always Cookie and Dory. In my experience, however, Chevy's own healing is good enough for her to be a solo healer, so unless you're going up against particularly deadly enemies, she's probably enough. Shielders like Thoma, C1 Beidou, or C4 Yanfei are valuable, and there are a number of off-field DPS supports who work great, and even Dea can shine in these teams. The makeup of the teams depends on which main DPS you choose, and so many of them work brilliantly. Pretty much any Pyro DPS would work well. Arlecchino, Linny, Yoimiya, Hu Tao, Garming, Yanfei, Klee, and even Diluc, though they each make their teams feel very different. Arlecchino is particularly fantastic with her high DPS potential, sweeping attacks, and generous animation range that are a great fit for the needs of these teams. Linny is also well suited since he's at his best in teams which can maintain a Pyro aura, which should be a breeze in teams with just one Electro. Yoimiya is also fantastic here due to her attack style, and the AoE provided by the overloaded reactions actually mitigates one of her main disadvantages. Hu Tao and Garming both feel a little unhinged in these teams due to their hypermobility combined with the knockback, while Yanfei, Klee, and Diluc are pretty comfortable as long as you're at home with their playstyles. All of them can be a ton of fun with Chevy. When built right, any Electro DPS would arguably work, but I felt that Raiden is significantly better suited than the rest. She has great personal damage when built right, applies a ton of Electro, and benefits from dynamic sweeping attacks and great interruption resistance. Clorinde is another I've enjoyed in these teams quite a lot, though her damage is noticeably higher in Quick Bloom teams. Sino, Kaching, Sethos, and even Lisa would likely work, but again, I tend to prefer them in more Dendro-focused teams, while Razor I haven't built yet. To put this into practice, let's look at a couple of my favorite Chevy teams. I used the Raiden Overload team as my go-to in the Abyss for a long time. Originally, that team was Raiden, Xiangling, Bennett, and Sucrose, but even at C0, Chevreuse is an upgrade on Sucrose here unless you're in desperate need of crowd control with lots of tiny enemies. I never bothered to pay attention to double swirling, so Chevy's resistance shred applying to both Pyro and Electro automatically feels like an upgrade on its own, plus the team benefits from everything else she provides and feels even more powerful as a result. One extra comfort here is that Chevy can battery Xiangling even from range, which can be a lot easier to manage than Benny's skill. The main loss is Sucrose's EM buff, but that's not super valuable in this team in the first place, and Chevy's attack buff more than makes up for it. It's also hard to overstate how fantastic Arlecchino overloaded teams feel. I particularly like Arlecchino, Beidou, Chevy, and Bennett. Since Arle can't be healed during combat, Beidou's interruption resistance and minor shield are just as valuable as her Electro application, while Chevy and Bennett bring in buffs to really boost Arle's already impressive damage. Arlecchino's animations really make this team work. Even when the enemies seem out of her range, she strides forwards and sights them down with wide arcs of her spear. This makes her deceptively mobile during battle, and chasing down those knockback enemies is a breeze. For a single target situation, I really like Yoimiya with Beidou, Chevy, and Yae. It's particularly comfortable since, aside from Beidou, it focuses on character skills rather than their bursts. With the double Electro, my Beidou tends to have enough energy to regain her burst on cooldown, Yae does fantastic off-field damage, and Yoimiya really shines with this team. So, as someone who has had C0 Chevy for the best part of a year and used her in a ton of teams, I can wholeheartedly recommend building her if you happen to have a copy. She's absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately for me, the 5 stars on her new banner are, again, not ones I really want to pull for. I'm on the fence about Kinich in general and would prefer to save my primos, and as I mentioned earlier, I do not want more Raiden cons. I'm still salty that they didn't put her on either Arlecchino's or Clorande's banners. I guess we'll have to see. I just hope that if I do end up deciding to pull for Kinich, Hoyo finally gives me some decent luck with the 4 stars, since Chevy is all that I would want. And if you're going to pull for her, I hope you get lucky too. Until next time!